For the past year and a half, I've been working on and off on my 3D puzzle game, and in this video, I finally finish it. But before we get to the new stuff, here's a quick little recap of what's happened so far. I just finished making a space where I can demonstrate all of the mechanics so far that I have in the game. And most of the mechanics I made are classified into 3 different groups. We have the instigators, which are basically the things that cause actions. We have the reactors, things that happen from the actions, and manipulators, things that change the environment somehow. There were a lot more instigators and reactors than manipulators, because really we only had one, the gravity pad. And in other puzzle games, the most fun puzzles are when 2 manipulators are combined in a way that you wouldn't expect them to be. And like I said in the last episode, generally speaking, the manipulators will add the most emergence to your game. And because I really only have one, I'll probably think of a few more to add in the next episode. That's where we're starting today. Now I know what you're thinking. Will, a box? Really? You already have one of those. And thank you, viewer, for your very astute observation. But this box is a little different, because this box is destructible. Now, what I mean by this is that if you shine a laser at it, it just gets destroyed. Now, I really like this idea, because it turns the laser emitter into a manipulator as well. It can also have some really fun and interesting puzzles. But at the end of the day, it is still just a box. So let's move on to something more interesting. Alright, let's play a little game here. I want you to think of any physical object. Got it? Okay, ready? Prepare yourself for this crazy insight. Now, with enough force, your physical object can move. I know, crazy, right? Now this freeze beam right here, he has something else to say about it. He just decides that things don't deserve to move. So if something enters its path, it's just kinda stuck there. Now this might sound a little dumb. Like, why would I want something stuck somewhere forever? And this is where the cool part comes in. Because just like the laser emitter, the freeze beam is also a reactor, meaning it can be activated and deactivated by the player. Okay, so this sounds pretty boring. Like, what interesting things can be done with glass? And yeah, it is pretty boring. It's just glass. Arguably not even a manipulator, but I thought the game needed it, so it's in here. Now this one was my favorite one out of the bunch to make, because physics. What the launchpad does is it will launch any object a certain distance away, and it will make it reach a certain height in the air. And I'm sorry guys, I just have to explain this one.
First, we need to figure out our desired initial velocity. And because velocity is a vector, we want to find both the x and y components. For the y component, we just use vy equals the square root of 2gh because of energy. Knowing this value from the y component, we can do some math and figure out that the x component needs to be g times the desired distance over 2vy. Now that we have our velocities, we need to actually do something with it. So when the object lands on the path, we want to add an impulsive force to it, which in game development just means an instant momentum change. We get our x impulse by multiplying the mass of the object by the x velocity, but we also want to multiply it by the forward direction of the launchpad, so it goes in the right direction. We do the same exact thing with the y component to get the vertical impulse. Then we add both impulses together to get the final impulse. Before we can add a force to the object, we need to make sure that the object's velocity is 0, so we can launch the object to the exact position we want to launch to.
But you already knew how to do all of that stuff because you watched this video right here, the ultimate guide for physics and game development, right? And I know I did the same exact thing last video, but it's a very good video and you should watch it. Alright, let's move on to the next thing on my agenda, improving the visuals. And we're gonna start with the models. The first model I made was a camera model. And it's pretty basic, it's just an icosphere with a little hole in it for the actual camera part. Nothing crazy. And the camera tablet is basically just a glorified rectangle with a hole cut out in the middle of it. Again, nothing crazy. The player model, on the other hand, well, you'll see in a second. Making the actual base mesh wasn't that bad, and the materials was a piece of cake. But the clothes, on the other hand, that was the worst part. Now, I decided to go about making the clothes by doing separate objects and just modeling it around the player mesh, which actually worked out fine. But when I started rigging, things went downhill really fast. If you're unaware, rigging is the process of giving the model bones so you can move it around and give it different poses. And this worked fine with the base mesh, but the clothes did not want to cooperate. I forget exactly how I solved this, because 1, it was a couple months ago, and 2, I purged the unhappy memory from my brain, but I did it in a way where I couldn't do any animation or any other posing. Which realistically is fine, because I just kind of need this one pose for the game. And that basically wrapped up everything to do with the player. Now we have 3 different types of boxes in the game, and they all look identical if there was no such thing as colors. So let's fix this. Once I made models for them, I brought them into the game, and here they are right here. One cool thing about the regular box is that when I put it on a pressure plate, the red parts turn green. And oh yeah, I also made models for the pressure plates, the buttons, and the switches, and they all turn green when they're activated. After that, I made the laser emitter model and the laser receiver model. Then I worked on making models for all my manipulators. I made a generic pad model, which I turned into a gravity pad and a launch pad by just changing the color of the arrow. Then I made a new model for the freeze beam, which I think looks pretty good too. The majority of the reactors, like the doors, elevators, moving platforms, they didn't get any fancy models, because I didn't think I could really make anything that looks good and actually functions in the game with the amount of time I had left. And if anything could realistically stay a big monochromatic rectangle, it's them. Then I made a couple particle effects. The first one I made was for the launch pad and the gravity pad. And it's just little arrows that will fly up in the direction that the pad goes. I then made a little wood breaking particle effect for the destructible boxes. And I think it looks pretty good too. And even though it isn't necessarily a particle effect, I also made an actual beam appear with the freeze beam, because that's pretty important. Now things are looking a bit better, but there's one thing I've pretty much neglected entirely so far, and that would be the walls. So I made this texture right here, which arguably looks even worse than the default texture, but I'm gonna do something cool with it. Just you wait. Because the game can get a little confusing with the player literally being able to walk on any surface, I wanted to kind of color code each wall so the player won't get as lost as he could be. So what I can do is replace all of the white parts in this image with a different color using a shader. And this is really good, but there's one tiny problem. I would have to make a separate material for literally every single surface in the whole game, because they're all different sizes and I wouldn't want stretching and squishing. To fix this, I have to do some fancy magic in the shader to manipulate the object's UV coordinates, which I used a very helpful video to do. Link in the description. Once I got the shader up and running, I made all the walls into prefabs, and using these prefabs to make the level could not have been easier. Now, believe it or not, I am just about done with the visuals for the game. And I say believe it or not because I feel like people who watched episode 3 won't believe me. At the end of episode 3, the game looked like this. Now, the game looks like this. What happened? Well, there are a few reasons that the game doesn't look like this anymore, but the biggest reason was because I set a deadline for myself, and I won't be able to make that deadline if I make everything as good as it looked like previously. And at the end of the day, having jaw-dropping graphics for this game was not high up on my priority list. Alright, cool. So the next thing we need for this game is some levels. At first, I was struggling to actually come up with creative ideas for levels. So what I did was I mixed and mashed mechanics together and figured out stuff that I thought was fun and interesting. If I thought it was fun and interesting, I just wrote it down in a Google Doc. Once I had a sufficiently large list, I picked one mechanic combo and then designed a level so that mechanic combo would be the big aha moment. Overall, I have no idea how the levels in the game turned out, because I neglected one very crucial aspect of game development: playtesting. I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the video, but I felt weird not mentioning it when we're talking about level design. Now, I'm going to leave all the level design stuff at this, because I don't want to spoil the game for you guys. But I will talk a little bit about the story, because that's what I worked on next. Now, the game has a very non-realistic, low-poly, video gamey aesthetic to it. So I thought, what better place to set the game than inside of a game? You play as a character named Cole, who is put inside of his friend Buster's video game that he made. Cole starts off by really enjoying himself, solving some fun puzzles, but he soon realizes things aren't all sunshine and lollipops, and he has to get out. And because Cole and Buster are both characters in the game, I need to, write a script. So that's what I did next. And once the script was all done, I needed people to read the script. And because I didn't want to pay actual humans, I downloaded the software called Replica Studios, where I was able to get some better AI robot-y voices to use for the characters. And once I had audio clips for all of the voice lines in every conversation for the game, I needed to have them play at specific points in the game. The way I did this was I made a new reactor specifically designed to play a conversation, and I hooked it up to a zone instigator, so when the player walks through an invisible trigger, the instigator will trigger the reactor to play the conversation. And once all the voice lines were hooked up into the levels, the story stuff was all done. And the next thing I needed was some UI. The first bit of UI stuff I needed to do was to make a circle. Yup, that's right, a circle. And this circle is actually pretty helpful though, because it tells the player exactly where they're looking at, so they don't have to just guess where to shoot the camera, and they can actually have a specific point that they know the camera will be. The next thing on the UI agenda is to make a pause menu, and then a main menu, and then a level select screen. And going back to the main menu, I also needed to have, a title for the game. So me and ChatGPT decided that Perplexing Perspectives was a pretty good title. Now, the level select screen was also pretty interesting to implement because I wanted to have the later levels locked off, so you can't just go to level 21 after completing level 8. And I also didn't want the player to start over at level 1 every time they replay the game. So what I need is to have some sort of saved data. And as a game developer, this really intimidated me because I had never done anything like this before, and I was always very confused on how it actually works. But after a very quick Google search, I found out it's actually really easy in Unity. And in not a lot of code, it was working perfectly. I did a tiny bit more UI stuff, but once that was all done, I needed to move on to some of the audio for the game. So I started the audio by opening up Bosca Sea Oil to make a theme song. Quickly, I realized I had no idea what I was doing, so I closed it, went online, found an AI sound generator called soundraw.io, which gave me a pretty good result that I used for the game. Next, I needed some sound effects, so I just walked around my house, recording myself interacting with different objects to get some noises. Then I put these clips into Ocean Audio and did some sound editing stuff that I really don't understand, and then exported them back into Unity. After they were back in Unity, I hooked them up to their associated game object, and the sound stuff was all done. The last thing we needed was just a couple little finishing touches, and the game was finally complete. Now I know what you're thinking. Wow, Will, that is awesome. How can I play your game? And well, viewer, you can play the game for free by going to itch.io and searching for Perplexing Perspectives. Or you can just click the link in the description. Just be warned though, the game is not perfect. I skipped over one very important aspect of game development that I alluded to earlier, playtesting. For those unaware, playtesting is when people play your game to give you feedback so you can change the parts of the game that people generally don't like. So if this was such an important part of the process, why did I skip it? Well, the biggest reason was because of my deadline. Would I have created a better game if I had just pushed this deadline forwards? Almost certainly. But I began to lose some interest towards the end of the process, and I never really cared if this game was going to be the best game in the world. Because at the end of the day, this game wasn't for the world, it was for me. The whole development process for this game was simply a mess. But I am so happy I went through it, because now I know what it's like to actually make a full video game. With all that said though, I would love for you to play it and give me some feedback. I most likely will not be doing any updates or anything like that, but I'd love your feedback so I can become a better game developer. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to catch up on all the game development for this game, click right here. And if you want to see some fun game jam videos, click down here. And don't forget to give me some feedback if you play Perplexing Perspectives too. Thanks again. See you soon.